mentioned it. Eights, starting out, have a high threshold for conflict.
If there is conflict and they are mad, they will let you know. So you don't have to worry about it otherwise. And this high threshold for conflict is what feels like conflict. So it takes a lot to get there, but eights do not want to sit around and just like swim in conflict. They do not enjoy that. They want to get it over with and like move on.
There's many people who have relationships with eights that may be averse to getting into conflict with them because they might feel like they were betraying them. And this is exactly the wrong move. The eight is picking a fight with you in order to see whether or not you're on their team. I suppose on the flip side, on the low threshold for eights, what comes to your mind first?
Well, I think certainly the betrayal and the incompetence. With betrayal, though, I think because eights are so tough, sometimes people don't recognize how sensitive they can be. And an eight gets vulnerable and then somebody makes a joke. And that is like, oh, I am never, ever going to do that again.
It's not even like people being incapable, but particularly people not doing things they are capable of.
Oh, yeah.
Like intentional incompetence, they have no threshold for that.
No, not at all.
You want to talk about the high and low threshold of the nines there?
Sure. So high threshold, I frame this as relentless optimism. Nines tend to have a high threshold for disorder in the sense that they are optimistic that things are going to work out, things will be okay, even when other people see disrepair. So some nines really resonate with that cartoon of the This Is Fine dog by Casey Green. Mm-hmm. And it's not to say they're not aware of the problems, but sometimes they just think everyone makes such a big deal out of everything and it doesn't really need to be like that. And they can just turn the volume down on some of those things. And so they have that high threshold and they're able to be like, yeah, but it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine.
I don't gravitate toward the word optimism because I'm not naturally an optimist, but there is a sense of that openness to like, we don't know how this thing is going to land yet. So let's wait until it lands to see what happens. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Positivity requires a whole lot less energy in my experience. Ignoring problems requires a lot less energy in my experience.
For you.
Dismissing the fact that anything needs done, that burns way less calories.
I mean, I feel like I've found myself a lot in this low 9 space. And I'm like, it'll work out. How it works out. Though as a 3, I'm still like, in the end, it will be terrible. But
right. Low threshold.
So low threshold for ones. This one trips a lot of people up. Ones have a low threshold for criticism. And when I first shared this, people were like, no way. They're so critical. And I was like, they are so much more critical of themselves.
There's a really good chance that they've already been through it in their own mind. And there's a pretty good chance that they've also been harsher on themselves about it.
They need a very light touch when it comes to that.
Yep. And even if you bring 7 things they did well and 1 thing they did wrong, they're not going to hear the 7. They will hear it and then immediately forget because then they'll be focusing on the 1 thing they did wrong.
That never happens to 3s, by the way.
Right.
Heart types and head types. You will know an 8. You will have seen an 8 unleash their anger on some soul who didn't deserve it. The identical anger that the 8 has that goes outwards. Imagine that turned inwards at oneself. And that's where the 1 lives.
What happens with unhealthy ones is they are so averse to feeling blamed or accused that they are incapable of acknowledging somebody else having a complaint or a criticism. So they can't experience more pain than they already are feeling. And so they just psychologically like block it out. 2s have a high threshold for expectations and demands that can be placed on them. So they expect a lot of themselves. And when other people expect something of them, they really strive to meet or exceed those expectations.
One could easily picture like a child who intuitively understands good gift giving, and then that gets reinforced and it grows and like they become better at it and it gets reinforced. And then you have like a 30-something-year-old who is so good at getting things for other people.
Yeah.
And that is part of how they understand who they are. And to unhealthy levels, twos will do things that they think you expect to an unhealthy degree.
Yes.
Yeah.
Two's energy is going outward. And as opposed to eights who are pushing outward to get control, twos are pushing outward in order to get attention. What are the expectations? How can I meet them? How can I earn my place in this spot?
Yeah.
And connection takes place if something is reciprocated.
Right. And so on the flip side, the low threshold is rejection, right? So one of the questions that I ask is, what happens when people don't like you? It's really intolerable for them to experience because they're looking for that image and that likability and lovability to be mirrored back to them. Threes?
Let's go.
Threes have a high threshold for productivity. We don't think that there is a limit to how much we could conceivably accomplish in a day. So doing is not just about working, but like anything. So people always criticize me about this. They say, you only talk about workaholism or a 9-to-5 job with threes. And I'm like, no, I'm categorizing all of our housework, to-do lists, goals, commitments, all of those things as work.
There is so much energy and optimism about what threes think they're capable of. And there's so much opportunity to do things.
Yeah. So like the past couple of years, I haven't been very active on Instagram, in large part because I've been writing books. And I had gotten to a place where I had my consulting side of my business. Then I had Instagram and podcast and newsletter and then courses. That is not feasible. And I am just now kind of accepting that. But I got so burned out because I was like, what is wrong with me that I can't do this?
You're human.
Right.
That's what's
Right.
wrong.
I have to sleep, unfortunately.
The phrase, what's wrong with me, pops for me most, and that I've heard threes talk about is that they feel as though they're sharks. It's the movement. I'm constantly moving because this is me being good in the world.
Yeah. And so what can be challenging is we have to reevaluate where that worth comes from, because it's actually not good for us to only get worth from movement. So fours have a high threshold for emotion and emotional expression. And I want to say, not all fours wear their emotions right out there and always express them, but fours have an incredible depth for how much emotion they can handle.
Fours are sometimes the most likely to reject the system of the Enneagram because how dare you put 8 billion people into only 9 little boxes. And there's such a clear sense of wanting to be understood, but not ever wanting to be exactly like anyone else.
For fours,
Yeah.
that directional arrow is pointing inwards. And so giving attention to what's within them is the place that they're getting attention first. And then the question spills out, similar to ones in terms of it spilling out to the world. Like, will other people grab hold of this? Will other people be captivated by the thing that I am witnessing within myself? And if they do, we're going to connect. And if they don't, then I'll just remain kind of misunderstood.
And all three of the heart types are really looking for mirroring. And I think that fours typically start with that internally, how they want to find and express their truest identity, have this belief that I have to push inward even further to understand the truest parts of myself. But then they want that mirrored back to them. And it can be hard for them to find that.
Ones, fours, and sevens, all the loneliest numbers. And it's for this reason.
I often talk about how fives don't really like a lot of personal questions. That can feel really invasive. And I had a 5 respond on Instagram and she said, oh, I don't mind personal questions. Like, as long as it's not too personal, as long as you're not asking me what book I'm reading. And I was like, okay, so we have different definitions of what is personal.
Either that or she's reading some scandalous material.
And in which case, please tell me, I want to know. But really that personal kind of concept can be really different for a 5.
And so much of what 5s, when they do share something, it's not stuff that they want spread around. And when we start violating that for 5s, like, we're not trustworthy with their possessions anymore.
What we're going to start to see with 5, 6s, and 7s is the anticipation that's there and where the direction of their fear is aimed. And again, in Steph's fantastic book are diagrams outlining this, in which the fear of 5s is about the things that are out there. And so what's going to protect you? Well, it's clearly going to be the assets that I've secured. And if the information that I prize so heavily gets out there, my asset is gone. Disclosing your book isn't the thing. It's that the habit has been ingrained in a person so severely that all things should probably be kept under lock and key, don't you think?
Yeah. So 6s have a high threshold for what feels like certainty. Like certainty is elusive. The closer they get, the further away it feels. And so they always think, okay, if I am really curious and I look for more information, then I will feel more certain. But what actually happens is they keep scratching the surface of all these different concepts and topics, and they end up feeling less certain. And that is really destabilizing for them.
You use the word readiness, and I also think preparedness. There is a sense of needing to feel prepared for what might come up. And that feeds a lot of the worst case scenario planning. And there's so little that we can be certain of, right? And 6s get to hold all of that tension because, we could also all be in a simulation and none of this is real anyway.
Don't put those sorts of thoughts for 6s is going to have them spinning out if you start putting that into their head.
You don't have to worry about putting that in their heads. That is already there. That came pre-installed. I was actually describing type 6 to a 7 recently because a 7 is like, I just see the world as the glass is half full. And I said, no. 6s see the glass as half full. They just are also aware the glass could shatter at any moment. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And
whatever's in there, it could be poison.
It could be poison.
Who cares if it's half full? What if it's half full of something that's going to kill us all?
It's okay. You're in a simulation. It doesn't matter. All right. Lastly, 7s.
So 7s tend to have a high threshold for what feels possible. They have these big outlandish ideas and they chase after them, and they don't think about this might not work. And so all of their energy is in, how do I make this happen? That actually is one of the reasons things work out for 7s is because they believe it's possible and they don't spend time thinking that it's not possible. That can be awesome. I've also seen it where it can be really bad.
Part of the challenge also comes in not finishing things that aren't the way that you envisioned them anymore. Like 4s, 1s, and 7s, all these idealists, and 4s do this a lot in relationships. 7s have a hard time completing projects when the project isn't fun anymore, right? They are not experiencing the joy, the excitement, whatever they thought was possible in this activity, then they're ready to move on. And sometimes that means they don't stick with things that they should have stuck with.
What 7s are fleeing isn't a craziness that's out there. They're jumping into the craziness that's out there. They are avoiding some dark stuff that's probably in their heart and their soul and their emotional life that just, we don't need to deal with that just yet. Instead of moving outward and inviting others to come along. There's possibilities here.